Hello, all, once again. Lots of friendly faces. So today I'm going to just talk a little bit about rotational grazing. Has anyone ever heard of rotational grazing? Or thank goodness. Okay, sometimes I say this and they're like, "Yeah, they graze." What? Anyway, so good. I'm glad. So before we even start, it's about why do we even use a grazing system? And this, some of you might be like, well, that's because animals need to graze and they can eat the grass. Right. You're right. And these ruminants that do graze can use, 75% of the resources that we can't, right? They can eat salad and get fat. We can't. And so that's why, having this grazing system, it's following just natural biology. They've been doing it for years, right? So we should have animals out on rangeland or out on a pasture, right? That's normal. Okay. Um, Sorry, it like did a weird noise. Um, and also some of this, the evolution of what we're working with, right? And so what do I mean by that? Well, we've had increased urbanization, right? We've seen this ebb and flow of climates and how our environment's changing and stuff like that. And all of it has either been enhanced by grazing, when done correctly, or you can see some of the detriment. Okay. And I do say that because we think that we need to identify that there's a right and wrong way to graze. Okay. And then with grazing, it is this conservation slash like restorative effort, right? Again, when done correctly. So it does have some added benefit of that environment, okay, from the soil to the plant to the air, even with some water sources and even the wildlife that are around. Okay. So there's really two main ways to graze when you think about it. So the way or the first one would be continuous grazing, right? So they're just always going to be out on pasture. The advantage of this is it's kind of cheap and you don't really have to worry about your time because you're not out there having to move animals or really do any extra kind of labor or anything like that. You don't have to go move fence. You could fix fence, but move fence and stuff like that. The disadvantage to this, though, is that it's really not very efficient. And the reason I say that is because those animals are going to go out and they're going to graze whatever they want, right? Um, Typically, they're going to try to hit what we refer to as ice cream plants. So those are going to be like the really palatable, really yummy kind of candy plants out there. And so if they're constantly out there and constantly have that pressure, they're going to continue to eat that. And that's where we start to see some of that decrease in plant growth. And you can start to see some of those erosion issues, or you might see some of the plant community really shift or change because of that. So it's not very efficient in that sense, as well as with that pasture value. And then, of course, with overgrazing, I mean, we have to really be careful about how long those animals are out there, right? Because it's not just them eating that piece of grass or that leaf blade or whatever it is. They're also doing trampling or stomping. So even just their footprint, literally, on that blade or in that soil, if it's really like packed down hard and then you have the wind and you lose your topsoil and it's a whole thing, right? And then you get into this managed or rotational grazing. And so this is more of that hands-on approach. So this is really where you're going to manage the resources that they're able to access, as well as the animals, and base that off of, okay, what's in this pasture? What type of grasses? What season? What are my animals doing? What's going on? And so you're asking more of those questions and being way more engaged. There's a whole slew of, advantages of this. One is helping with some of the plant diversity and overall productivity. So you're not overgrazing or really attacking a singular plant species or anything like that. Animal health. So with rotational grazing, you typically do see an increase in animal production because they're not out there trying to fight for the same thing over and over again. They'll actually put on weight and, they're not having to go miles and miles and miles of trying to find something, especially once we kind of reach a critical point where, well, now we've done some bad things to the pasture and oh, that's not great. And so now they're having to adapt and overcome. And the big disadvantage from this, honestly, is going to be there's going to be some planning going on, monitoring, some capital investment, so maybe some fences, some water troughs, stuff like that. Your time, labor, things like that. So again, more hands-on. Okay. So the reason that we think about grazing systems and the reason that they are so important is because you really need to understand what you're working with. Okay, so we need to understand how these grasses work. And I'm not just saying, well, they grow and there's some stuff that goes on, and there's a transfer of oxygen, carbon dioxide, not quite like that. Okay. But what we need to understand is, okay, during different seasons, so whether it's spring, summer, fall, winter, what's that plant doing? Okay. And a lot of that is dependent upon the type of plant it is, right? So we talk about warm and cool season grasses, which I'll show really quick. But really understanding the growth cycle of that plant. Okay. Understanding the plant's root system. Okay. Understanding how that root system is going to go down, if it goes out, how long it is, how it's going to grow, stuff like that. What happens when that plant essentially gets its head chopped off and how it grows or recovers. And then that really comes into just, again, what happens to that plant when it does get grazed or it loses some of that biomass. Okay. So why does it change? Well, as I mentioned, season's going to play a huge role in it, right? But also your environment. Okay. We talk about different types of environment, whether you're at the base of a mountain, at the top of one, if you're over on some plains, wherever. Okay. You're going to have a difference in what forage or vegetation is available. Okay. It's depending on your pasture, if you're doing rangeland, you might have two pastures side by side and completely different kind of grass species there, right? Just because of the way the wind hits or the water precip accumulates on it, whatever it might be. Okay. If you're doing irrigated pasture, obviously there's a little bit more management to this, so it's not quite as intensive. So going into the actual quality change, or like how that plant will change throughout the year, but we're really heavily reliant on this cool versus warm season idea. And I want you guys to understand that there is a specialty, if you will. Plants will grow better in different seasons based off what they are. Okay. So your cool seasons, putting in, any clover, fescue, orchard grass, anything like that, you can see that you kind of have two peaks, right? And so this is useless. You have two peaks, right? And so that's where it's going to hit kind of that peak growth stage. Same thing with your warm season, right? For Arizona, warm season is really popular because, well, it's hot and we have monsoons. So you'll really have that one peak. So the reason I wanted to show you this is because depending on what you're working on, this is what's going to help dictate your planning method for your rotational grazing. Okay. Now, is this exact? Of course not, because depending on precip or when it warmed up, or if we got another cold snap, this can change. But this is a good rough estimate, or at least a good starting point. Okay. Everyone followed me so far? Excellent. The best way to do this is test. Those of you who've seen some presentations from me, you've probably seen this, you will see this every time I talk anything about nutrition or forage, is because there is so much value in testing your forage. Just because you have a cool season grass and you kind of expect it to peak here or here, again, we have lots of environmental changes happening. It is a good idea for, at least if it's your first year of trying to establish a pasture, or maybe it's your first time out on a range pasture situation, that first year is very critical to actually go out and monitor. But honestly, there should be monitoring happening every year and kind of do like a trend, if you will, and follow it out for at least 3 to 5. Okay. And the reason I say that is because last year we had extreme drought, right? Like, holy crap, we had extreme drought, right? This year, we had pretty good rain. Well, depending on where you are in the state, some had better rain than others, but still, we had a pretty good monsoon season. So that's why those changes, it's good just to kind of get an average, or at least in your mind, help you train your mind and kind of your eye even of what's happening. Okay. So always test your forage. Okay. So kind of going into, okay, well, what's happening with these grasses as they grow and as they clip? I did talk about like a root system, right? So this shows utilization. Does anyone know the general rule of thumb when we graze pasture, what we tell folks how you should graze it? Take half, leave half. You guys ever heard that? Maybe. So typically if you're grazing anything, and I should have preferenced this talk at the beginning. I do cowboy range science. So I've only taken a few range classes, but I am by no means the absolute expert. So I'm just giving you what works for us in like management. If you have other questions about it, I might know the answer, but I will definitely find someone who does too. Okay, just throwing that out there. But for us, as a general rule of thumb, we say take half, leave half, kind of a thing. And the reason being is because of how this grows, okay? So if we take half of that biomass, so we're gonna graze that top half, right? You can see that there's gonna be slight growth that stops, right? Because we just stressed that plant. We just took something away from it. It's gonna be slightly stressed, so it's gonna stop growing, right? It doesn't completely stop growing, okay? As you can see, there's still a great root system. You can kind of see a little bit of regrowth at the top. But it is going to hinder that plant's ability to regrow or recover, okay? So the reason we say take half, leave half is because, as you can see, this has the shortest amount of kind of that stop on that plant of, hey, we just got stressed, let's not grow anymore, okay? As you increase your kind of what you're taking off the range or off that plant, you can see that we run into some problems, right? So even just going up by 20%, you can see a drastic difference in that root system, okay? You can see how like scarce some of those plants are on top, right? Some of those leaves and stuff. And then if you go to, so I'd say 70 and 90% are pretty kind of reaching that overgrazing, especially the 90%, obviously. And then at 90%, you see that there's basically no root system. That plant is so stressed, it says, okay, we're just gonna die. We're not even gonna worry about trying to survive, okay? And so that's why it's really important to understand what exactly you're doing or your animal is doing to that environment, okay? Because we want to preserve this, okay? First and foremost, we might have livestock, but we really are grass farmers, okay? Once the grass is gone, it's gone. It's really hard to establish native grasses back on range. Obviously, irrigated pasture is slightly different. Again, management, right? But overall, right, you could still overgraze an irrigated pasture and ruin your crop, right? So if anything you take back from today, remember this picture. Remember the damage that can happen from overgrazing, okay? So what is rotational grazing? Well, it's in the name, right? It's rotating your grazing schedule, your pastures, your paddocks, your areas, whatever you want to call it. And so what we're doing is we're managing how long those animals will be in an area, right? And how much they're going to take from it. So intensity, does anyone know what intensity is in a grazing system?
I would guess how many animals you have grazing that area.
Yeah, kind of. So yes, so it is related to stocking rate. And also because you can have like high intensity, so like mob grazing of just like hit it hard and hit it fast. So yes. And I do say kind of just because it also depends, like if you're running cattle and sheep together, that throws a whole other thing in there. But yes, duration, again, time, you can leave it in a little longer. Again, mob grazing, you're going to hit it with a lot and shorter. If you do it on a more conservative stocking rate where, say, that pasture can hold 10 animals, but you're only going to graze at 5, okay, well, now your duration might be a little shorter because you don't have as many animals on it. Right? Resting versus recovery. So by moving this, you're going to have a rest period, right? So it kind of goes back to, we want to make sure that excuse me, that plant is able to recover from that stress, right? And then size, number of pastures. So the biggest thing when it comes to rotational grazing is you can do it. Okay. I want everybody, like, you can do this. Okay. And this is something you absolutely can do. Maybe start small. Because sometimes I'll get phone calls and people are like, yeah, I have 100 acres and I want to split it all up. And I'm like, okay, how? How many do you want to do? I'm thinking like 20, maybe 30 pastures. Well, that's okay. We can chat about that. But maybe start small and then work your way big, so it's not as intimidating, and that way you can actually gauge your labor and time commitment to it. Okay. So grazing intensity, right? This is how much forage is going to be removed. So this is also with just what that animal is going to be eating, what that animal is going to be stomping on or trampling. And we do take that into consideration, because even though having this animal kind of walk on that soil, it does excite the microscopic bugs that we can't see in the soil. They get excited. But at the same time, like, obviously that cow or that sheep's not going, oh, there's a blade of grass here and there's a blade of grass here, and try to like walk between it. So we do take that into consideration. In order to maximize as much of the area as possible, again, we go back to take half, leave half, right? And these are just very generalized numbers. So if you are starting at something that's 9 inches tall and it looks healthy and it kind of has these different growth characteristics where you can actually see like new plant growth on it and all that fun stuff, and you have them hit it, okay, you're going to leave half, right? Or maybe we're going to let that recover a little bit longer. It's always best if you can let something recover longer. So wait till it's about 15 inches and then throw something out there, okay? A lot of these, I'll tell you right now, are dependent on whatever grasses you're growing or whatever's available to you. There's plenty of things. I know it was said earlier that the U of A will officially tell you I'm not that way. You can Google it. There's books and all sorts of plant communities and stuff like that that have the reference guides to different type of plant species and stuff. Luckily, hopefully Debunker, is he coming later this afternoon? Cool. So he's like the cover crop master, so you can ask him all the questions about cover crops and kind of the proper like removal mass and all that stuff off there too. So grazing duration, this is how long that animal's in the area, right? So it's really good to kind of have this chart. And a lot of what I'm telling you is we are measuring utilization. Okay. So utilization is pretty key when it comes to managing any type of grazing system. And so having a chart like this where you can set it up in Excel, maybe you write it down on a piece of paper, whatever. But just note, the day the animals went in, when they came out, right? Or put in, I like specific dates because I'm not great at the math. And so later I can go back and help calculate that out. But that way I have, these ideas of, okay, well, if we had a longer duration here, maybe they need a little bit longer recovery here. So I'm actually not going to put them in the pasture just yet. And so it gives me a better idea of what needs to be rested and for how long it needs to be rested. Okay. Does that make sense? Perfect. And so again, very, very generalized of keeping animals 5 to 15 days in an area. Totally dependent on the size of the pasture and the actual forage mass in that pasture, okay? Along with pasture type. So if I'm on range, that might look slightly different than irrigated pasture, right? Again, management style, okay? But again, very generalized. I'm 100% going out there and going, how much forage have they taken off this piece of property? Okay. So out of all of this, recovery is absolutely key, okay? So we have to be able to rest and recover our grasses somehow. Very much like myself right now, I do apologize as I have a little bit of a head cold. Some of us like to go, 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 stress ourselves out, go, 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 never rest, right? And then we get sick. And this happens. Grasses do the same thing, right? We saw it with that picture of looking at the root system and how healthy that plant is. If it's too stressed, it's not going to do it. So that's why recovery is absolutely key. The length of recovery, once again, it depends. If you do the take half, leave half method, fantastic, great. But if you did the take half, leave half method and we got 0 rain or you didn't irrigate and it was just kind of hanging out, well, it didn't really recover properly, right? It does need some of those other extra factors, right? Or if it was really dry and windy and you started losing some of that topsoil, okay, it's going to need more time to recover because it's still undergoing some of that stress. Yes.
Question.
Okay.
How many cows or steers per acre is typical for the snowflake area?
It's so dependent. Yeah, I can't actually give you an answer. I would have to go out and do like look at the forage that's available and what acres you're on and what type of plant types you have. Yes, sir.
The ag map thing that the USDA puts out puts it at something like 0.8 cows per 40 acres.
Okay.
Yeah, and
That's a great place to start.
Less than a cow.
Yeah.
40 acres.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a great place to start. Yes.
sort of kind of a rule of thumb, 1 cow per acre. But again, it's depending on
Yeah.
the grass there.
Yeah. I will definitely say it's not 1 cow per acre in Arizona, even on irrigated pasture. But it is highly dependent based off of the USDA stats of, 0.8 AUM per 40 acres. It's a great place to start. But honest to God, it really does take going out and looking at the forage that's available and doing what we refer to as a production calculation So basically going out there and figuring out how many pounds of forage are there, and then also testing to see what that nutrient quality is. Because I could have 2,000 pounds of forage, but if the quality is at 4%, the cow's eating newspaper, or that sheep's eating newspaper, so.
And FSA and NRC will not support programming or loans. I think their stocking rate is 4 cows, it's 4 cows per 40 acres.
Mhm.
So, they won't loan on property or support any financial, FSA will not support any financial programming on private farms if your stocking rate is above the 1 cow per acre. And that is based on also when the appraiser comes out and reviews the land.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I know the 0.8 is right, the 1 is right, depending on how much land you want, but the take home is that it probably is not even that.
Correct. Yeah. It does take a lot of unfortunate math and science to do this. I just say that because I'm really bad at math. I always have people check my numbers. But because it does drastically differ, right? I mean, we've all seen it. We all see what happens during a drought, how we have to destock, we see how the environment changes. And once again, like what your neighbor's doing, even if you have the same, you're like, well, I have 40 acres and they have 40 acres, 2 different types of management, 2 different areas. It could be crazy different. But yes, thank you for all that input. I really appreciate it. And then my favorite thing is go take a walkabout. Go out in the pastures, take pictures. You can use a grazing stick where you can actually go out, and this is kind of when I say grazing stick, use a tape measure, yardstick, whatever. They make fancy grazing sticks, do whatever works for you. But basically go out there if I'm especially if it's an ungrazed area. I'm gonna make like maybe a little GPS on my phone, like a dot or something. I might, in fact, I think I have never mind. Anyway, I might make a GPS point on my phone, take a bunch of pictures, figure out, how high that grass is, let the cattle or sheep out, and then after they're off, go take another measurement and see what they actually grazed. What does that look like? And that can kind of help me with that recovery. As well as just again monitoring what's going on. Right. So again, maybe when I pull them off that pasture and I want to put them back in, I'll go right back to that spot and do it again, right? And see what's going on. And it shouldn't just be one spot in a pasture, like you should take some samples across the pasture, but just in general, okay? Because you'll start training your eye to what's going on, especially if you're new to the grazing game or to the rotational grazing. And so again, the more information you can get, the better the tools are that you can use. Great. All it is to help make a more informative decision. Okay. So this just kind of shows, again, I thought it was kind of an interesting in terms of growth and again, when we talk about that recovery of what's actually what we're looking at. Okay. So I keep talking about like, yeah, go measure the grass, right? But what are you measuring? So post grazing, you'll see where they graze, right? Like especially if you look at like how a cow's mouth is or a sheep's mouth, even the wildlife, because obviously we know we can't really keep deer or elk out. And understanding, how they will take that plant and how they kind of chop it off or pull on it or anything like that. So we can see how they graze that plant. And so we're going to take that as kind of our initial assessment or our first height, if you will, of, okay, they graze that much of that plant off. Or this is our starting point. And then as that plant grows, I mean, you'll start to see those shoots come up, you'll start to see new leaves. And that's really what we're looking for, is we're looking at that height at any new leaf growth. Leaf growth. Yeah, sorry, that sounds really weird when I say it out loud. And then also just looking at, if depending, again, remember that lovely, percentage of grazing, that this is happening in kind of like a timely manner. So what do I mean by that? That you're actually seeing recovery, that you are actually seeing this new growth happening, or you're seeing these new leaves pop up. And it's not just saying kind of the stubble height of, there might be like a little bit, but something's off, something's wrong. Okay, so it could have been that it was either super dry, or they did hit it really hard. They got closer than what you were kind of planning on, or whatever that might look like. Okay, because when those animals come through, they don't care if it looks like this. They're looking at this, right? but we want to make sure that that plant is healthy enough and has recovered long enough. So we want it kind of more here where you start to see not just one new leaf, right? We want it to actually recover. So you want to have more of that leaf growth where you actually see kind of these offshoots or like 3 or 4 of them. Okay. Because all that cow is going to do is just keep hitting this while it's still stressed, or this sheep. Sorry. Okay. So where do I start in terms of picking rotational pastures or figuring out what I do? Well, Google Earth is a great place. So if you can get an image of what you're working with, can help. Obviously, working with Cooperative Extension and RCS, folks are fabulous to work with. Not that I'm biased or anything, but basically, it's a great opportunity to plan out what's going on or what you're going to do, what's feasible. Okay, something that is doable. You don't want to be hiking up mountains and trying to do this, right? You want to make sure it works for one, what makes sense in your head of actually moving these animals, or based off of what you're working with, maybe you are in a period of recovery. Maybe your whole purpose and focal point is trying to recover the pasture using grazing as one of those methods. So starting and kind of plotting what you're doing, right? Understanding if you have any internal fencing whatsoever. If not, that's going to be something we'll talk about. Or do you have natural barriers? Maybe there's some type of crevice in the ground or the tree line. It's more popular in the Midwest, but still, maybe there's something natural that's happening out there. We talked about the testing your pastures, and then of course soil testing. So soil health is important. We don't know a whole lot about it on rangeland right now. Hopefully there'll be some research coming down the pipeline. But it is important to make sure that those bugs in that soil are happy. It's also important to make sure that the nutrients aren't deprived in the soil, and making sure that we are rotating everything off and using that cow or that sheep as kind of that cycler for us as well, right? With that manure distribution and all that other fun stuff. Okay. So again, have a goal in mind. Once again, if you're trying to improve pastures, great. If you're trying to extend a grazing season, so if you have any permittees, this might not be able to be helpful just because you have to follow, BLM or US Forest Service. But if you're working with either irrigated pasture or private or anything like that, maybe you're trying to figure out how long you can actually keep them out there with a nice quality or higher quality forage. You're trying to lower feed costs because, man, feed's expensive. Hay is ridiculous. And it's just going to keep going, right? Or just even improving animal performance. Maybe you realize, I think my animals could be doing a little bit better, or they could have a little bit more weight on them, or maybe their breed backs could be a little bit better. So just kind of have that goal in mind, or all 4, whatever works. So if we're going to be improving pastures, you need to understand what's missing or what's going to be needed. Okay. So what do I mean by that? Do we have issues with erosion in the area that you're working with? Is there any trails or paths? So whether it's public coming on or cow trails, I don't want to call them side by sides, anything like that. What is working or not working, if you will, in your area. Looking at that plant diversity. So if you're doing native grasses, what does that look like? If you're doing irrigated pastures, do you just have one plant in there? Are you doing some kind of special cover crop blend thing? What's going on? Wildlife usage. I don't know about you, but it's hard as heck to keep any wildlife out of a property, right? Unless you're using that high tensile, keep the buffalo out type of fencing. But even then, it's hard. So also understanding that use. So it's not just your animals grazing, it's them grazing as well. And then of course, soil health. And so soil health is kind of that underlying thing of one of those things you don't think about all the time, but it is necessary and it needs to be there. So fencing. When it comes to rotational grazing, is probably one of the biggest things, right? You have to have some type of fencing out there. Obviously, there's different types that you can use. What you do is going to be based off what works for you. Okay. But do keep in mind about electric fence of sometimes if the ground is too dry, it won't work. Okay. So being in Arizona, where we are typically in situations where the ground is way too dry, electric fence doesn't work. Okay, so that's just something to be mindful of. Although it is the easiest to move around, again, just keep that in mind. When you set up your pastures, you could do it one of a couple different ways. You can either just put internal fencing everywhere, keep your pastures how they are, or maybe in your mind it's working in just like these paddocks or square areas where, okay, I'm gonna just make a pie, if you will, or a pie slice, and I'm just gonna move fence line that way. It's whatever's gonna work, okay, or work for you. There obviously there is a cost associated, and with does anybody know what the cost of like a mile of fence is right now? It's a lot. It is. It's a lot. It's well over $14,000. And so there is technology, which I'll talk about later this afternoon, that is becoming available. If we'll talk about that, that might help with some of this for the future. But again, whatever method or capital investment you choose, totally up to you and what you're willing to do. Also, again, any permittees, make sure you follow like any NEPAs or any other things that are in place for that. I did put, add a lane for more accessible pasture rotation. So maybe it's not, if you do have just internal fencing and you don't want to put like a gate here, gate here, gate here, gate here, maybe you just put a lane down the middle of that thing and you can just move your animals, in the lane to each pasture, whatever that looks like, right? So you can make it more accessible than not. And then of course use natural barriers. If there is a natural fence, by all means use it. No need to fight what was already put there for you, right? But again, just things to think about. And then this is probably the most important thing is water, right? Water is essential for life. It also works as a positive incentive for animals. They're going to move where water is. So something to keep in mind, depending on how your pastures are set up or how you're rotating them. If you have a portable water trough or anything like that, move the water and the animals should follow. And if they don't, you either have a really good wet year or something's off. But they should in theory follow. So if you do a portable water system, make sure, again, you have the resources. You're able to move it around, you're able to fill it with water. Any fuel costs with that or time. I don't know, people that just have like random water trucks or whatever, what if you're just hauling gasoline tanks, whatever that might look like. Again, natural water, if it's there, use it. I don't know how many folks do have access to natural water resources or anything like that. The only key to this is though, you just have to be careful that the animals don't really like go out and like wade in it, just because you can actually decrease and really harm that resource, if you will. So it can cause it to dry up. You can completely change just like the barrier or like that dirt tank, if you will, dirt tank. And it can really cause some damage to the ecosystem there. So the best practice, honestly, is to like fence a little bit into that water. And you can keep them just in like one little area. So at least you can control the area that they're in. But other than that, yeah, water, very essential. So going back to, remember, we have this change, the shift in season, these different types of grasses. So extending your grazing period and then setting up for the successful rotation. So by understanding this cool versus warm season sort of grasses and when they're going to peak, that can actually help you determine how you're going to rotate through your pastures. So again, understanding that pasture composition, using some of that as a positive incentive. So if you realize like maybe just the way the pasture is or the way your land is dispersed, maybe it's, oh, well, I planted this in pasture A, B, C for the winter months, so they're going to be able to move much faster over there or whatever, or paying attention to your native range grasses where, we do have pockets where there are a ton of cool season grasses versus warm season grasses. And so just identifying that, again, something that's super helpful in terms of when you are deciding how you're going to split your areas up. I didn't talk at the very beginning of this series about animal nutrition, right? And trying to match peak growing season with animal requirements. So that's just something to be strategic on, of making sure that whatever that forage is that's available, that it's meeting what that animal needs. If we all recall, nursing is going to be the highest energy demand. So whatever you do, whether you're planting pasture or you're on native grasses, just make sure that you're at a peak forage somewhere when they're lactating. Okay. When in doubt, you'll be fine. If you can stockpile forages, that will help you with your grazing season a little bit further, just because one, you can supplement, right? If you can. Again, I know there's some stipulations with permittees, but it is something to think about, as well as if you're doing any irrigated pasture, and maybe that's part of your sort of grazing plan, if you will. So, growing a blend of Bermuda and ryegrass, maybe you're going to bale it and then get it like another second growth on it, and then that's when you'll graze it, whatever that looks like. Okay, it's again dependent on your operation, your needs, and kind of what you're trying to get out of it. So you can totally do this. Okay, this is something that is a very achievable management practice. It's something that we highly encourage in terms of trying to keep a very nice balance of trying to preserve and have a sustainable grazing system for the natural resources that we use, because we are blessed being in the Western United States, where we have about 75% of natural resources being on extensive range. So trying to make sure that we keep that alive and well. Again, start small, then scale up. If it's something that you haven't thought about, or you're trying to move from a continuous grazing system to a rotational one, maybe you're just going to divide out 3 sections. Okay, nothing crazy. Just see if you can do it, what that looks like for you. But it's a good place to start. Okay. And when you do that, definitely look at the area again of where they've grazed. If there's a pocket where they grazed really hard, maybe section that off, and that's just going to rest. And that's just going to be a rest period. Who knows what that will look like or how long? Again, depending on the grasses there, but just maybe rest that out. Again, know your grasses, know your pastures, know what your animals need. If you're running low line Angus, they're going to have drastically different needs than a full mature Dexter cow. Or if you're running, merino sheep, I actually don't know if anyone runs any merinos up here, but that's going to look drastically different than, I don't even know, Navajo churro sheep or something like that. Okay. So again, they do have slightly different requirements. And then when in doubt, ask for help, right? That's what cooperative extension is here for. We're your free consultant. But also, work with your NRCS folk, work with your FSA folks, work with whatever is available to you. Okay. There's no such thing, quite literally, there's no such thing as a stupid question, or something that's a necessary concern, because if it impacts you, it impacts us. Okay, we do care. So on all of that note, this is my contact information. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, or need to reference something, or maybe I said something wrong and you want to talk to me about it later, that's fine too. This is the best way to get a hold of me. When in doubt, obviously, Anita is your area agent. She is a great resource. And in fact, she's actually my plant expert. As I said, I do cowboy range. And if she doesn't know an answer, we normally go back and forth on each other. So we do work really closely together. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for your time. Is there any other questions I can address? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Dan, and I work for Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS. Most of you are familiar faces from last time I was here. But like what she was mentioning, if you're really interested in your soil health, there's cropland, pasture, or range. You have soil scientists on staff, and they can come down and they'll do a soil boring on your property. They can give you some suggestions and just give you a good idea. And again, it's free.
Yeah, thank you.
Take advantage of it.
Absolutely.
And I have a couple of cards with me, or just holler at me sometime during the session and I'll give you my contact. So
Excellent. So every natural resource thing I said wrong, so you can fix it. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
is there information and resource, something we can look at as far as what types of plants we want to get off of? the land?
Yeah. Invasive species, they're fun.
Local weed is really
Right. Unfortunately, I don't have a fix all. So it's funny you mentioned that, because I was just at a workshop yesterday, 2 days ago, and we talked about the same thing of how to control local weed and toxic plants and stuff. And the sad part is that during drought and like overgrazing, that's how they come in, right? Right now, there's not a set solution. There's been some speculation that, you know, depending on when you graze it, it's less toxic. There's a little bit of truth to that, but at the same time, I don't want to tell people, yeah, graze the toxic plants, it's fine. Is there a way to take loco weed off pasture or off range?
Okay, so
There we go. Anita has it.
prayer, fire, and then, so the basic is that local weed is a generic term for astragalus and another species that's jumping out of my brain. And so everyone remembers like the purple flowers. There's actually some additional ones that are toxic. So it's not just the purple flower, but some are actually beneficial. So like the vetches, there's a vetch, we have to add some up there in the thing. They are actually non-toxic to the animals. So when you're removing local, you can pull it, you can burn it, you know, you can obviously do a lot of things. But make sure that it is actually local weed. And then the other thing is, as an ecological restoration specialist, both Elise, who's our specialist, and myself will tell you when there's an open space, something will grow, right? And a lot of times we don't have control over that. So just that, you know, so when you pull that, make sure you have something ready to go there. Because the astragalus species, they like to be nurse plants for a lot of the other really annoying ones. So once you pull that out, you're gonna see a flush of like those heads. Things like that, like
Yeah.
because they like to keep that soil safe and cool around it. So when I pull them, we burn them. You know, we do the propane. The propane kind of thing. Yeah, and since you're savvy with, you know, a lot of the plant-based things, is you want to hit that point right between, right before it seeds. But when it's put all the energy into the flower, because that's when you're gonna kind of take away all that energy. So, yeah, and that's with any of the goat's heads is a different story, as is the purple, the nightshade, the purple nightshade that I talk about a lot. That one actually is like, the hydra, you cut off one of its head and like 7 more grow. Because it has a really strong root system and it can. So if you know your weed, especially like the astragalus, the local weeds, or any of those, as long as it doesn't revegetate through rooting or anything else, then just fire. Cut. So those are probably the best. The sugar leaves nightshades toxic to animals as well.
Yeah.
Even tomato, a lot of people give their goats tomatoes, and I'm just like, it's not an instant kill. It's like having them it's just look pink as opposed to a instant. And it sounds so horrible, but it's the way that we have to talk about a lot of our plants up here. Is you know, people will buy animals, put them out, and be like, okay, I bought all these goats, and they're gonna graze down my land, and it's not gonna be weed anymore. And what they don't understand is that our rangelands got to the point they were because of overgrazing. So then everything came up that is no longer palatable to the animals. They don't eat it, so it becomes the main focus. And then these are the plants that are kind of taking out our animals. Kidney failure, liver failure,
The whole mess.
bloating. You see where they get the blockage. Sorry, Jocelyn.
No, it's good.
Tangent.
No. Toxic plants, bad deal.
Many this year.
Yeah, we literally, so I'm sure you guys have heard, because I think I talked about it in like the alert program or whatever. Most of the alert calls we got this year were all toxic plants. I think there was only one that was not toxic plant. It was like a disease thing, but
I'm not sorry.
yeah,
I wanted to add, if that's okay.
absolutely.
For the lunch setup is, don't forget about a few things. One is the cattle market up here is saturated. Everybody wants cows. Cattle market up here is kind of as far as, you know, the butchering and selling, because you can go to any of the major ranchers up here and buy basically off the hoof. But cattle does have a foundation here, and that is the, you know, ecological argument we can have all day, every day. It is just a fact. And I happen to like cows. Jocelyn happens to like cows. We have a lot of ranchers. Don't forget the ability to mix in other livestock with that. Sheep, goats, pigs, you can even free range chickens, like, there's a lot of opportunity to add these mixed herds up here. I personally like my goats because they do, and they can process a little bit more than maybe some others can.
Mhm.
But we have some folks doing the Navajo Churro sheep, and they're starting to get that into the market and wanting to put that into 4-H and wanting to get those at our fairs. We have goats, of course. So there's an opportunity to not just rotationally graze cattle, but rotationally graze everything.
Correct.
And especially when the manure tends to have estrogen breakdown times, a nitrogen source.
Mhm.
Cows and horses take a bit, but sheep and goats, they take a little less time overall depending on circumstances. So don't just focus on the one thing, no matter where you are in Arizona, focus on the multiple things.
Mm.
You know, the cow can feed you and your family, but if you want to be in the production world, why not sheep? Why not goats? Why not pigs? Why not chickens?
Yeah,
So-
very, thank you for adding that, because I do get, sorry, I talk a lot with cattle ranchers, so I sometimes get one-sided, but Anita's absolutely right. Use a multi-species grazing approach. It works, I should say, not it works, it does work. And yeah, and whatever you want to run, go for it. Just please don't overstock it or overgraze it.
Thank you, Toddler.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. There you go.